Welcome to this video on how to do session authentication with Qlik. We'll start by showing the flow when you perform session authentication with Qlik. When you access Qlik from a browser, it looks for a cookie, and in that cookie, it looks for the session ID. The cookie name is specified in the virtual proxy, and the session ID is the value in that cookie. Then Qlik validates if a session exists for that session ID. If it does, then no additional authentication is needed. When you are testing this, it is important to remember to clear the cache or run in incognito mode. This way, you won't have any old cookies in the browser when you retest with another user. If you're not authenticated, then it will ask a session module if this ID is a valid ID and what kind of access level that ID has. Then it will return that to Qlik and the user will be logged into the client. Let's look at it on a server. What you see here is a Qlik server where I have created a virtual proxy. I can start to log in using the default virtual proxy, so I will log in with Windows Authentication. Here you see that the virtual proxy I'm using has the prefix called SESS, and the cookie header name is X-SESS. In the Windows Authentication pattern, I entered forms to make sure it doesn't conflict with Windows Authentication when testing on the local server. I have whitelisted different IPs and domain names from which I want to access this server, and for the integration part, I have listed the session module base URL, which is the URL for performing the step we saw here on number 3 in the slide. Let's go back to the virtual proxy. Let's see what is actually running on the URL specified in the Authentication module redirect URI. This is just a little test page, which enables us to test the session login with different logins. If I click on one of these, I will log in, and it will take me to the Qlik hub. As you see in the URL, I'm using the SESS virtual proxy to authenticate the user. So that is the full flow. But now, let's understand a little more about what happens behind the scenes. Let me go back into the code which performs this authentication. I search for Create Session to see what happens when the user clicks on Login on the web page we saw earlier. When Login is clicked, it will take the user to the path login and add the parameters for the selected user and user directory to the URL. A method called Create Session is called, and parameters are added to it. The only thing the function does is write a cookie to the browsers with a name identical to the one specified in the virtual proxy. We're also generating a random GUID which adds in the selected user's name. Expires is set to 0, so it will be deleted with the browser session. Then it redirects to the redirect route. Let's check what the redirect route function does. We can see that it takes us back to the URL specified here in line 16. So, just redirecting back into that page, where we see Qlik is using the SESS virtual proxy, and then into the hub. Let's go back to the login path. The function is called Create Session. Let's move down there. Let me copy and paste the redirect. And then I will comment the redirect out so we can see what happens in the browser. As we have changed the node.js code, we need to restart the server. I'll go back into the browser and clear the history, so we don't have any old cookies hanging in the system. If we try to refresh the Qlik hub, we will now be asked for credentials because we have cleared the cookies. Let's go back to the login page on the session module. Open the Chrome Developer Tools at the same time and look at the cookies. Because we are not redirecting to any page, the only thing we will see is a new cookie. If I click on Amy, we can see a cookie with the name X-SESS and with a value in it. So that is the cookie Qlik Sense is picking up when you enter the hub. If I delete this cookie and go back into Qlik Sense, it will ask me to authenticate. Let's go back to the simulated login page. Click on Amy again, and we get a new cookie. Let's go back into the tab where we have the Sense Hub and refresh. It will take us through as we now have a cookie. Remember, what happens here is Qlik Sense reads the cookie and then asks the session module if it is valid or not, and then returns to the hub. This is done because we specified a URL in the Authentication Module Redirect URI field in the virtual proxy. Let's try to do something else. I will clear the history. And I will do almost the same thing as before. So go to localhost port 8190. I will click on David to get a new cookie, and then go to the Qlik tab where I have the Qlik Sense hub and refresh. We can't get in now, but if we change the URL to localhost/sess/hub, it works. That is because the cookie is created on the localhost domain and it won't work cross-domain. We'll come back to that in a second. The important thing to understand here is that if I'm going back to the virtual proxy, we will see in the integration section that we are calling the session module URI, but you need a specific path under that URL. Let's try to go back to the session module code and find that part of the code. The expected route is called session, and it expects some parameters. Read the cookie name and write that to the console. We also find the ID sent from Qlik Sense, which we split and then create a session. So let's test the full flow again from the standard URL. To ensure we are testing the full flow, I will enable the last redirect again. Save the changes and restart the module. Then I will go back to the test login page. Refresh it, and now I will log in with Brian. We can see that I'm going through. Let's try to go to the code and search for session and change it to session 1. Now we don't have the required path required by Qlik Sense when authenticating. Let's restart the session module again and clear the cache. Then I'll go back to do another test login. We can see that the user can't be validated. So this little test tells us that we have to have a path called session ready to take the request from Qlik Sense. Otherwise, the session module won't work. Let's look at the function called createIt, which is called from the session. To be able to create a session in Qlik Sense, we need to have a certificate, which can be exported from the Qlik Sense QMC. If you want to see how to export the certificate, please watch one of the videos on how to create a ticket with Qlik Sense. In my case, the certificate is installed in the same directory as the session module. If I go to my C drive in the directory where my session modules are, we can see the client.pfx file, which is exported with a password called test. So I need to put that into the code as well. The certificate will be attached to the request when the session will be created. This part is what is being done when we get a response from the request. The actual request is done in this part of the code. The input to the request is what kind of user directory the user is coming from, which is just free text, what the username and session ID are, and which attributes should be connected to the login. In between here, as this happens server-side, you could do a database check if the ID is valid or not. In this case, we will just accept it and return the session. What you see up here is what's coming back from Qlik Sense. Let me make sure that I change session 1 back to session and restart the module. Now let's go back to the browser. What we have here is the actual URL Qlik Sense is requesting. So we have domain name, port 8190/session/ the session value coming from the cookie, and then a separator and the username. So if I click here, we will initiate the same flow as when Qlik Sense is authenticating, and we can see the return value. Now we have an understanding of the full flow. We write down a cookie at login time, or whenever the users are clicking on analyses or reporting. When you redirect to Qlik Sense, it will come back and ask the session module URI if it is valid, and then it will return all parameters to tell who the user is and the other required parameters. Let's look at one of the other complexities, domains. Up until now, we have been running everything on one domain. You might remember that when we tried to create a cookie on localhost and then tried to access Qlik Sense on another domain afterwards, that did not work. That is the security you have using cookies, so we can't bypass that. However, very often, subdomains are used. It could be that you have a main domain and then you have a portal running on a subdomain, and Qlik Sense running on another subdomain. This is not working out of the box, so certain things need to be done to make that work. Let's go back to the Qlik Sense hub and look at what the problem is. I will clear all the browser data. I'll change the subdomain to main. That's pointing to the same server, but it could be on a different server in the same domain. Here, Qlik Sense wants me to log in because I'm not authenticated. We are on the same server, but on a different subdomain name. Let's check what we did with the login in the code. Instead of redirecting to Qlik Sense after getting the cookie, I'd like to stay on the same page. Back to the login page, and let's log in with David. If we look at cookies, we have a cookie here on the main.jvi domain, because that's where we created it from. Therefore, if we go to Qlik Sense, it still says that we are not authenticated because we came from a different subdomain. If we change this to main.jvi.com, use the virtual proxy, and go to the hub, it works. The problem is now again we have everything on the same subdomain, which is exactly what we didn't want. What we can do is look where we created the cookie. Let's find that in the code. Here we can add domain and then :.jvi.com. What we are doing here is telling it that it should be readable for all subdomains within that main domain. So URLs equals something.jvi.com will be able to read the cookie. Let's save it and restart the session module. Again, let's clear the cache. We still have main here, so let's refresh it. Let's log in with Karen and take another browser tab and open the Qlik Sense hub on the other subdomain. We are through. What happens now is that we have the same main domain, but different subdomains, main and sense. Because we entered the domain setting when we created the cookie, we are able to read it from both subdomains. If we look at the cookie here, we can see that instead of having this structure, main.jvi.com, it has a .jvi.com. This structure tells the browser that it should be accessible across subdomains. The last thing we will look at is related to when we are returning the session to Qlik Sense, which is done in the code here. Here we assign what kind of access level we want to give to the user. Let's add an attribute called group with the value teststream. Now we are not only parsing the username and user ID, but also an attribute, which is passed as part of an array, so it could be multiple attributes. In this case, we just pass one. Let's go back into the QMC. I can find a security rule that I have already created. This is a general rule, so it's not a rule specific to any specific object, but it is specific to an object type, in this case, all streams. The rule says that whatever the stream name is, this rule should be applied. The actual rule specifies that if a user comes in with an attribute called group, and that group is equal to a resource name, in this case, if it's equal to any name of any stream in my setup, then it should let the user see the stream and the apps in that stream. Let's restart the session module and do another login. If we look over here on the Qlik Sense hub and refresh, we can see the Everyone stream. We have added a hard-coded group in our session request, but of course that could be dynamically based on the login. If we make a new stream in the QMC and call it teststream, the same as our hard-coded group name, and because we have a generic rule saying that if you're coming with a group which has a value identical to a name of a stream, we should be able to see the stream. Let's go back to the hub and we can see the test stream is visible. If I change the name by adding a 1 to the name and apply, the stream will not be visible because we don't have an attribute coming in with that name. In this way, you can get full control of not only the authentication of the user, but also what kind of access level the user should have. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.